צדיק כתמר יפרח יפרח, צדיק כתמר יפרח, צדיק כתמר יפרח יפרח, צדיק כתמר יפרח, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה יזכה. צדיק כתמר יפרח יפרח, צדיק כתמר יפרח, צדיק כתמר יפרח יפרח, צדיק כתמר יפרח, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה יזכה. צדיק כתמר יפרח יפרח, צדיק כתמר יפרח, צדיק כתמר יפרח יפרח, צדיק כתמר יפרח, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה, כארץ בלבנון יזכה יזכה.
שיר למעלות Give thanks to the Lord and praise His name. Give thanks to the Lord, He is good. יחד
הלוואי ומענן תרד עלינו קשת, הלוואי שלעולם הזה יש תקנה, הלוואי ויום יצמח מתוך סופה גועשת, הלוואי ולא תאבד לעד המתנה, הלוואי שהמדבר יצמיח עשב דשא, הלוואי ועוד נשב בצל התאנה, הלוואי שלא נכאב ואיש אחיו יאהב, הלוואי ויפתחו שוב שערי גן עדן, הלוואי ויתמזגו מזרח ומערב, הלוואי הלוואי ונחדש ימינו כאן כקדם, הלוואי ולא יישא עוד גוי אל גוי חרב, הלוואי ולא ננטוש את דרך התקווה, הלוואי והאדם יהיה רחום עד הערב, הלוואי שיש סיכוי אחד לאהבה, הלוואי שלא נכאב ואיש אחיו יאהב, הלוואי ויפתחו שוב שערי גן עדן, הלוואי ויתמזגו מזרח ומערב, הלוואי הלוואי ונחדש ימינו כאן כקדם.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study. I am Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, broadcasting from Katzrin in the Golan Heights in Israel. And tomorrow I'm going to be flying to the United States. I'll be in the United States for about a month. It's the first time I've seen most of my family in 5 years. When the pandemic started, I was in New York, living in New York, and I said, it's time to get the heck out of this place. I basically left and spent the last 4 years in Portugal before I came back to Israel in June of this year, in June of 2025. And so that means I really haven't seen most of my family since March 2020. So I'll be flying back to the United States. My flight leaves tomorrow night at around 11:30 p.m. And I arrive on Monday, which is apparently inauguration day for Trump, and I didn't even realize that when I booked the flight. And my flight is scheduled to land at 12:30, and I think Trump is supposed to be inaugurated right around at that time. So that'll be definitely interesting. Hopefully the United States will still exist at that point. And it's supposed to be a freezing cold day in New York. I mean, I've been in Israel since June. I've been in southern Portugal, not right along the coast, but about 45 minutes from the coast for the past 4 years. The coldest temperatures I ever experienced were maybe 30s or something like that. I'm going to say around 30. No, I think there was one night in Portugal where it was in the high 20s, like 29 or 28 or something like that. Okay. Tomorrow, and this is Fahrenheit we're talking about. Tomorrow, I mean Monday, when I land in New York, let's see here. The temperature in New York on Monday night, it's supposed to go down to 13 degrees Fahrenheit, and then Tuesday night, it's going to go down to 8 degrees Fahrenheit, 10, 9, 16, 8, etc. I haven't experienced cold weather like that since 2020, basically. I'm actually kind of looking forward to it. Not that I love the cold weather in New York or in the United States, but it's definitely, it keeps you awake. And I used to do these walks in the cold and in the dark down by, I grew up and lived near for many years when I was in the US near a bay. And so I do these walks along the bay, and I just dress up in layers, like 3, 4, 5 layers. It would be the same temperature, like 12 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that. And after about 20 minutes of walking, I was sweating. I needed to peel off layers. So hopefully I get a chance to do that again. That was always fun and interesting. But yeah, so so the bottom line is, if anyone would like to get together with me, and like I said, I'm mostly going to be in the New York area, then let me know. We could sit down for a cup of coffee. We could talk about Torah. We could talk about life. We can talk about Israel. We can talk about whatever. So let me know. Private message me. As I said, I'll be there as of Monday, and I should be in New York for about a month. I never do return tickets whenever I go somewhere, pretty much, because I don't want to be tied down to a certain date. I have certain things that I want to accomplish. People to see, places, as my friend used to say, places to be, people to do, whatever. So things to know, people to do, things to see, people to do, whatever. So, and when I feel I've done what I need to accomplish in the United States, I'll book a flight and head on back to Israel. But it's very clear to me that I will be back in Israel soon. I love it here. It's one of the best moves I made to come back to Israel. You know, I lived in Israel for a total of about 15 years back in the 1990s and 2000s up until around 2012, on and off. But now I am back, and I am back to stay with the help of Yahweh. So that's that. Other announcements. I really don't have any other special announcements. The usual things, you know, please spread the word about the study. Please support the World Alliance of Qara'im, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to get into that whole thing. Maybe in the middle of the broadcast, I'll talk about it a little bit more. Because I really do have a lot of plans for the World Alliance of Qara'im now that I'm back in Israel, now that the time is ripe. So maybe we'll talk about that in the middle of the study, but I certainly don't like to dive into that kind of thing. Okay, so so that's it. That's all I have to say. So I want to talk about, to start off, we'll talk about an interesting topic, a number of verses in the Tanakh which are interesting and kind of unexpected. This is meant to be kind of fun, interesting, an unexpected kind of introduction. Some of these verses I've mentioned before, and others I haven't. We'll do about 3 verses. And it just shows that the Tanakh is just full of surprises. And if you don't know the Tanakh well, or if one doesn't know the Tanakh well, then they wouldn't expect these things. And sadly, I have a wonderful, wonderful community here, rabbinical Jews, until we build up a Karaite community here in the Golan Heights, which is my goal, and maybe even after that, I'm part of this really nice community here in Katsrin, mostly English speakers, and they're just super nice. I've made some very nice friends there, and they're wonderful people. They really are, and very intelligent, but they're so brainwashed into the rabbinical Judaism cult that the amount of, I don't want to insult in case any of them is listening, but the amount of nonsense that comes out of their mouths, not by their own fault, but just like if you were a Mormon, you would spout out all kinds of absolutely ridiculous nonsense because that's what the cult is, telling you is putting in your head. So if you're a rabbinical Jew, you spout all absolute ridiculous nonsense, and it's just amazing. I won't even get into. Okay, I'll get into one detail. I was speaking to a friend of mine, very intelligent guy, and I like him very much. And he was speaking about how the Jewish people were saved in Egypt because of outdoor sex. I was like, huh? What are you talking about? So he said that Pharaoh put out the word. We know in the beginning of the book of Exodus, that all the males, all the male babies should be thrown into the river. Okay. So what did the Israelite couples do? They, instead of having sex in their homes, they snuck out into the woods and had sex in the woods, and that was the only way that the nation of Israel was able to survive. It's in the, I don't know, I can't remember which midrash he's doing. I think it's Bereshit Rabbah. No, it wouldn't be Bereshit Rabbah. I can't remember which one. At any rate, this is the kind of nonsense that comes out of the mouths of rabbinical Jews. There's no basis for that, obviously, in the Tanakh. It's just bizarre speculation, which really has no bearing on anything, or no connection really to much of anything, no importance. And this is all you hear from coming out of the mouths of rabbinical Jews, the most ridiculous, nonsensical, silly stuff. And the level to which rabbinical Jews know Tanakh is just, it's pathetic. It's just absolutely it's absolutely pathetic. Rabbinical Jews just do not, hold on one second, please. Here, they do not know the Tanakh. They do not know the very basic text that is the Yisod, that is the foundation of our entire, I like to use the word religion, that is the foundation of our entire covenant with Yahweh, and our entire history of keeping that covenant before strange cults moved in and distorted the terms of the covenant. And so it's just, it's a crisis. It's really a crisis. I think back in the United States, I remember for many years, maybe they still do, they're always crying out about how American students don't know math and science. They don't know math and science. And so there were all of these efforts, all of these initiatives to try to get American students to, not be so dumb, fat, and stupid, which most of them are. And sorry, Americans, been there, done that myself. But that's the truth. In fact, as an aside, I'm going to be landing in New York on Monday, and I don't mean to insult anyone, but in case you you fit into this category. But the one thing I always notice, I've, flown away and come back to New York, I don't know, tens of times, maybe, I don't know, 100, but definitely tens of times in my life, from Israel, from other places. And the first thing I always notice when I get off the plane in New York in the United States is how freaking fat everybody is. It's just unbelievable. Why is everybody so damn fat in that country? It's incredible. You go to any other country, even countries where they eat, very much more rich, caloric food than the United States, like in Europe, right? Like France or Portugal or Spain. And you'll see different levels of average chubbiness. Like some countries are super skinny. Like if you go to Morocco, everybody tends to be really skinny. If you go to Portugal and Spain, they tend to be slightly plump, not fat, but slightly plump, again, on average. And, maybe there are other places as well. But when I land in the United States of America, the first thing I noticed when I get off the plane is, what is going on here? Did I just land in the middle of a fat farm? I mean, why is everybody so damn fat in this place? And it just goes to show that the materialism, yeah, they poison the food supply. That's absolutely correct. I was just about to mention that. Right? Food is not food in the United States. Even the so-called good food, the ground is poisoned. So the food is already, right? It's basically poison. Food is not food in the United States. Food is money. It's a way to make money. News is not news in the United States. News is entertainment, a way to make money. Finance is not finance. It's just, a way to squeeze people and take advantage of people and make money. So nothing about the United States is real. Everything is just a facsimile of reality there. Anyway, I don't know how I got off onto this tangent, but what I was saying, right, I don't know how I got off this tangent. At any rate, the main point I was trying to make is that, oh, right, I was saying that there's been, at least in theory, an initiative over the past couple of decades to get American students realizing that they didn't know, I think now they call it STEM, right? What is it? Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We never called it STEM when I was growing up. We just called it math and science. But to get Americans, they realized there was a crisis, that Americans were falling behind in math and science. And so all kinds of initiatives were taken to try to improve this crisis. Well, the same thing really needs to happen in Israel. It's an absolute crisis. There is nobody practically in Israel who has a good knowledge of the Tanakh. The rabbinical Jews either have very little knowledge of the Tanakh, or for those who have a bit more knowledge of the Tanakh, then it's mixed in with the nonsense of rabbinical Judaism, to the point where many of them don't even know what's actually in the Tanakh and actually not in the Tanakh. They'll say all kinds of things, and I'll say, oh, really? Can you please show me where that is in the Tanakh? And they could spend an hour looking for it. Sometimes they have. And of course, it's not in the Tanakh, because I know it's not in the Tanakh because I studied the Tanakh, right? And you hear that all the time. And then you have those who just don't know the Tanakh at all. And if there's anyone in this country at all who knows the Tanakh, it's probably going to be more likely secular people. Not a lot of them, but a certain subset of secular people who are kind of into Jewish history. Actually, the people I've met the most who know the Tanakh the best are basically biblical archaeologists. Some of them can be completely secular, and some of them can be, usually they're not too religious, but they can be like very traditional. They're Tanakhic. They're really almost Karaites in a certain sense. Those are the people I've met and come across who know the Tanakh the best of any group of people in Israel. Those who are dealing in one way or another with history, Jewish history, biblical archaeology, subjects like that. But your average person on the street, especially your average religious person on the street here in Israel, has such a poor knowledge of Tanakh and has such a poor ability to distinguish what's actually in the Tanakh and actually not. And I think some of them don't even want to, because they don't care. They think of the written Tanakh and their so-called oral law. And remember, we never call it the oral law. If you call the quote-unquote oral law of the rabbis the quote-unquote oral law, you are falling into their propaganda for reasons I've explained in the past. I just call it the rabbinical interpretations and additions to the Torah. That's really the proper definition of what it is. But they conflate what's in their quote unquote oral law with what's actually in the Tanakh, to the point where a lot of times they can't even distinguish between the two. And one of the things I love to do, as I mentioned with Rabbinites, is I like to play this little game, because a lot of Rabbinites think they know the Tanakh very well. I think they know the Torah very well. And they'll say something that's not in the Tanakh. And I know it's not in the Tanakh, as I mentioned, because that's what I study all day long. And I'll say, okay, please find that for me. And it's fun to watch them sit there. I know it's around here somewhere. Wait a second. No, it's here. And then sometimes they could spend an hour, and you just know what the answer is going to be in the end. Anyway, digressing a little bit. But there really is a crisis in the nation of Israel, among the people of Israel, among the Jewish people, that they really we do not know, or they do not know, because we Karaites hopefully do, they do not know the very basics, the very basic texts of our nation. Okay? So that being said, we're going to have a little fun now. We're going to talk about 3 different verses in the Tanakh, which are very interesting and unexpected. I'll have to plug in a couple of minutes, but that's to be expected, since no one has offered to come to Katsuin and be my sound and video engineer. I'm still waiting. So let me share the screen, and let's talk about some interesting and fun verses that we wouldn't expect. There we go. So let's start with, let's start with Chronicles 4. And this is talking about King Solomon. So 2 Chronicles is basically I won't say a replay, but a kind of maybe historical or scribal rehashing of many of the events that are mentioned in the second book of Kings, Second Kings, just as First Chronicles is a rehashing of many of the events mentioned in the no, that's incorrect. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Second Chronicles covers the books of Kings, first and second, and First Chronicles covers basically all of the Tanakh up to and including the end of 2 Samuel. So basically, 2 Chronicles starts with King David and quickly moves into King Solomon. And King Solomon is already at the beginning of the first book of Kings. Okay, so we pick it up here. King Solomon, we know, took over from his father David after David died, and his father wanted to build a temple to the Lord, a house for the Lord. And as we know, Yahweh told him through prophecy that he has blood on his hands. He spent his entire life spilling blood for righteous reasons, but still that the house of Yahweh should be a house of peace, and therefore David is not going to be allowed to build the temple, but your son David, Solomon, will build the temple. And so that's what we pick up here in 2 Chronicles. We have a detailed retelling of events of how King Solomon, the details of King Solomon's building of the temple. And we get down to chapter 4, and maybe I'll switch over to the Hebrew. And we have something called the Yam, or the sea, sometimes called the Sea of Solomon. Very interesting history with the Sea of Solomon. It's mentioned later on. Okay, so what is the Sea of Solomon? So it's basically the kior, or the basin that's mentioned when the instructions are given in the second half of the book of Exodus about building. It's or building a kior, or a basin where the Kohanim are to wash their hands and feet as they carry out the sacrificial service. Okay, and so when Solomon finally builds the temple, he makes a much more extensive or much more elaborate basin, and that's called the sea. There's a depiction of it. Okay, so look at that depiction of it, and let's talk about it very briefly a little bit. So we'll just go to my favorite rabbi, my personal Rebbe, Rabbi Wikipedia, and let's talk a little bit about this Sea of Solomon. The Molten Sea, or the Brazen Sea, was a large basin in the temple in Jerusalem made by Solomon for ablution of the priests. Ablution means bathing or washing of the priests, in case you don't know that word. It's described in 1 Kings 7:23 through 26 and 2 Chronicles 4:2 through 5. It stood in the southeastern corner of the inner court. Whoa. Let's try that again. It stood, why is it doing that? It stood in the southeastern corner of the inner court. According to the Bible, it was 5 cubits high, 10 cubits in diameter from brim to brim, and 30 cubits in circumference. And we'll get back to that in a second. That's what I wanted to show you. The brim was like the rim of a cup or like a lily blossom. And that is described in 2 Chronicles. And its thickness was a handbreadth, 3 to 4 inches. It was placed on the backs of 12 oxen, standing with their faces outward, not actual oxen, but oxen made of, I think, bronze, if I'm not mistaken. It was capable of containing 2,000 or 3,000 baths of water. And a bath is just a liquid measure, a biblical liquid measure that is equivalent to, I can't remember, I have to look it up, but it doesn't matter. It was big. The fact that it was a wash basin, which was too large to enter from above, lends the idea that the water would have likely flowed from it down into a sub-container beneath. The water was originally supplied by the Gibeonites, but was afterwards brought by conduit from Solomon's pools. Dubious. Discuss. The Molten Sea, which, by the way, have now been excavated as the Pool of Siloam. They believe they found the Pool of Siloam. If you are in Jerusalem ever, I highly, 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 highly recommend visiting the City of David archaeological sites or archaeological center. It's incredible what they've done to that place. They've made so many amazing changes over the past 20 or 30 years. At any rate, the Molten Sea was made of brass or bronze, there we go, which Solomon had taken from the captured cities of Hadraezer, the king of Sova. And Haz later removed this lava from the oxen and placed it on a stone pavement. It was destroyed by the Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians, in 2 Kings 25:3. So basically, Nebuchadnezzar, when he ransacks the temple in 586 BCE, he takes all of the treasures of the temple, and it mentions explicitly that he takes this molten sea, or this bronze sea. Okay, so there's a picture of it. Let's look at it again. And let's look at something interesting. I got to turn down the heat again. And let's look at something interesting. Shabbat Shalom, Tan Avior. Let's look at something interesting. So we're going to switch over to the Hebrew. We'll start in the beginning of 2 Chronicles chapter 4. If you want to follow along on your own in English, Hebrew, or any other languages, may I recommend Serbian? Inside joke to my good friend, you know who you are. Okay, so verse 1. Wa Ya'as, this is speaking about Shlomo, about Solomon. Ya'as mizbeach nechoshet, 20 ama arko, wa 20 ama arochbo. So Solomon made the bronze altar. This is the altar of sacrifice, 20 cubits in length, and a cubit is approximately 1.5 feet. although there are two types of cubits mentioned in the Tanakh. There's the old cubit and the new cubit. We won't get into that right now, but approximately 1.5 feet. Wa'esrim ama rothbo. So 20, that's 30 feet. So 30 feet long, 30 feet wide. This is again the altar of sacrifice. So eser amot komato, so 15 feet high. And now we get to the bronze or the molten sea. We get to this dude over here, this guy over here. Let's learn about it. Verse 2, Ya'as et hayam musak. And he made the molten, mutzak means from the infinitive latzeket, the underlying root yatzak. It means to pour a molten liquid into. To pour molten, I should say molten metal into, in this case, molten bronze, right? It's basically a cast, right? I believe I'm using the words correctly in English. It's like it's a cast into a mold. It's liquid bronze. It's bronze that's heated and to a temperature where it becomes liquid, and then it's cast into a mold. Okay, that's what mutzak means. Mutzak means cast or mold or molded. Okay, eser ba'ama. So 10 amot. Ama is a cubit, so 15 feet. Misfato el sfato, from lip to lip, and lip means edge. So from edge to edge. So what is this talking about? We're talking about, oh, I can use this thing over here. From edge to edge, it was 10 handbreadths. I'm sorry, 10 cubits or 15 feet. And what are we talking about? We're talking about from here to here. Oops, is this thing working? Hold on a second. Work. Why is it not working? Let's try that again. No. Work. Paint. What the heck is going on? Oh, and now my battery's about dead. Okay, I don't know why it's not working. We'll try one more time. I don't know why it's not working. Anyway, it means from side to side. In other words, the diameter of this molten sea was 10 cubits or 15 feet. 10 cubits. Let's go with cubits. Okay. Just give me 1 second, please. I've got to plug in. I'm not going to disconnect or anything. I'm not going to put on music, but I just got to grab my plug and plug in. Just give me a second here. Let's see how we're going to do this. There, no. Move you over, Lavi, just a little bit. There you go, sweetheart. Thank you. I'll prop that up. Make yourself useful. All right. Just another minute or two, guys, and we'll be back in business here. Yep. Okay, we're good. Make sure back here. Correct. Cubit is approximately the length from your elbow to the tip of your middle finger, and if you measure that for the average person, it's about 1.5 feet. That's the measurement that's usually given. Again, although there's something called the short cubit and the long cubit, or the early cubit and the late cubit. I think the early cubit, if I remember correctly, is said to be 48 inches. Does that make sense? No, that couldn't be. No, I must be getting it wrong. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. It doesn't matter right now. Okay. At any rate, so from edge to edge, the diameter of this yam is 10 cubits. And then we see, okay, it's round, it's circular. Okay. Agol, saviv, v'chamesh ba'ama komato, and its height is 5 cubits. V'kav, shloshim ba'ama yasov oto saviv, and a length of 30 amma, 30 cubits, encircles it all around. So what is that talking about? That's talking about this. That's talking about the circumference. So we have a diameter of 10 cubits. We have a circumference of 30 cubits. Now we're speaking about Americans not knowing their math and science so well, but if you think back to math class, what does that remind you of? Anybody? Do we have some non-Americans here who might actually know it? Just joking. Diameter 10 cubits, 10, and circumference 30. Where did you learn that before? I'll say it again. We have this C. Maybe I can get a better picture. Let me get rid of this thing. Sea of Solomon, images. Oh, shoot. Now it's doing this. Get out of here. Images. Okay. Maybe that's a better picture of it. Okay. So we have this. Yeah. Why is it not working? Okay. So we have this. Let me see if I can make it bigger. No, of course not. Is it? 1 second. This is too complicated. It's okay, fine. Okay, you get the idea. Let's look at this picture here, right? So the diameter is 10 cubits. The circumference all around, once around the edge, is 30 cubits. Where have you learned that before? Where do you remember that before? Anybody? Do you remember learning in math, probably 7th grade, that the relationship between the diameter of a very good Earth, yeah, more or less. The relationship between that diameter and the circumference of a circle is what number? Somebody? Americans, come on. You're proving all my stereotypes. Circumference divided by diameter in a circle is what number? Going once? Going twice? Exactly. Thank you, Mariana McNana. You've redeemed your country. It's pi. What is pi equivalent to? Pi is equivalent to 3.14159, okay, or 22/7, we learned. It's equivalent to a little bit over 3. And that's exactly what we see here, okay? We see that it says, I'm going to read it again in the Hebrew, okay? Eser ba'ama misfato el sfato, 10 cubits in length from lip to lip, meaning from one side straight across to the other side, meaning the diameter, and it was circular. Our goal is circular. Agol saviv, it was a circle all around. In other words, its edge was circular. Then it speaks about its height, but we don't have to go there. And with kav shloshim ba'ama yisov otos saviv, and a length of 30, literally a line, but a length of 30 cubits encircled it all around. So the circumference was 30 circles. We have here approximately pi. Now the Torah never speaks, or I will say often does not give exact numbers. It will often round numbers off. I've had this discussion before here, I think, and with people elsewhere. And so it doesn't say 3, and I don't know, and a little bit more. It just says 3, right? That it was approximately 10, or it was 10 cubits in diameter, and it was 30 cubits in circumference. But essentially what we see here is pi. We see that the ancient Israelites again, can we say they knew about pi? This doesn't prove they knew about pi because they could have just measured it and they're just picking off the measurements. But it does show that relationship between the diameter and the circumference of a circle that we all attributed much later on to, I guess it was the Greeks. I'd have to look it up again. Was it Pythagoras? No, I don't think it was Pythagoras who discovered pi. I don't remember who discovered pi. Probably some Greek. At any rate, since it is a Greek letter after all. But but we see here in the Tanakh this relationship of 3 between the diameter and the circumference of a circle. And in this case, the circle once again is this Yam Mutzak, this molten sea, which was the wash basin for the priests, the Kohanim, used to wash their hands and their feet when they were carrying out the sacrificial service. Okay, so isn't that interesting? We have pi in the Tanakh. So that's interesting. Verse number 1, and that is, if you want to wow your friends, it's 2 Chronicles 4, verse 2. 2 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 2. Okay. Any questions, any comments before we go on? All Polacks are not dumb. All Polacks are not dumb. So that means if all Polacks are not dumb, that means that there is no Polak that is not dumb, which means that all Polacks are dumb. Is that what you're trying to say there, Mariana McNana? I'm just messing with you. I love Polacks. I love Polacks. Guys, I love the Polacks. In fact, my grandfather was born, actually, 2 of my grandparents were born in Poland. They got thrown out and almost killed, but they were born there. My mother's father was born in Lodz, Poland, and my father's mother was born in Białystok, which I believe was part of Poland at the time, although I think it changed hands a bunch of times. Okay, any questions or comments about this verse? 2 Chronicles chapter 4, we see the use of pi in the Tanakh. Okay. If not, let's go on. We're going to go on now to Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 16, another very, very surprising verse. Very unexpected. Jeremiah 3, chapter 16. I'm sorry, Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 16. And this is, of course, Jeremiah, as he often does, calling out to Israel to return, to repent. We could read a bit in the English, and then when we get down towards 16, we'll switch over to the Hebrew. So he gives a parable, an analogy, a mashal in Hebrew. If a man divorces his wife and she leaves him and marries another man, should she return to her again? Answer, no. This is an explicit commandment in the Torah that if you leave your husband, if your husband divorces you, and then you marry another man, and it says, basically it implies that you have relations with that man, sexual relations with that man, and then he divorces you or you leave him, you're not allowed to go back to your original husband. It's considered there's the word abomination there used. I don't remember. I'd have to look it up. It's considered a defiling kind of thing. It's considered improper. It's almost like adultery, right? You're going back and forth between husbands. Okay. Would not the land be completely defiled? But you have lived. This is Jeremiah speaking to Israel, saying to Israel, you have lived as a prostitute with many lovers. Would you now return to me? Declares Yahweh. Verse 2, Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 2. Look up at the barren heights and see, is there any place where you have not been ravished? Ravished means basically made love to. By the roadside, you sat waiting for lovers, sat like a nomad in the desert, which again, I guess, according to the Rabbinites and the Midrash I mentioned earlier, is a good thing because it saved Israel and Egypt. You've defiled the land with your prostitution and wickedness. Again, this is Jeremiah speaking to Israel, comparing Israel to a whore, to a prostitute. Therefore, the showers have been withheld and no spring rains have fallen. That is one of the curses. If we disobey the covenant with Yahweh, we're almost at the end of the book of Leviticus, and towards the end of the book of Leviticus, we're going to get to a section called the curses, the blessings and the curses, and this will be made explicit that if Israel violates the covenant of the Torah, then the rains will not come in the right time. Yet you have the brazen look of a prostitute. You refuse to blush with shame. Have you not just called to me, my father, my friend, from my youth? Will you always be angry? Will your wrath continue forever? This is how you talk, but you do all the evil you can. In other words, you come crying to me, Daddy, Daddy, help me. And meanwhile, you're out whoring yourself on the street corner. And now you cry out to me when you need help. So during the reign of King Josiah is the famous king mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 22, thereabouts, as the one who, he didn't himself discover the Torah scroll. He was told about the Torah scroll that had been discovered in the temple. So that's the same King Josiah. He was also hid. He also was the boy king. He became king at the age of, I think it was 7 or 8. I think it was 7, if I remember correctly, and was hidden until he grew older for fear that he would be assassinated. So during that, he was considered one of the good kings of Judea. There were no good kings, no northern good kings, but there were a couple of good kings of the south, including Josiah, including Asa. At any rate, during the reign of King Josiah, Yahweh said to me, have you seen what faithless Israel has done? She's gone up on every high hill and under every spreading tree and committed adultery there. So every high hill and every spreading tree, this is a metaphor, not even so much a metaphor. It's a direct reference to what's called a bama, or a high place. A high place is where idol worshippers worship their idols, and very typically what you had were two idols, a male and a female idol. The male idol was often a Baal, was often one of in the area of Canaan at any rate, was often one of the Baalim. A Baal, you've all heard of worship. And that represented the male, the bull, right? And then next to that bull deity, next to the bull idol, was very often a tree, an Asherah tree or some other type of tree. The tree represented the female. Why does a tree represent the female? Because trees bear fruit, at least female trees bear fruit. And fruit represents fertility. So the tree represented the female deity. So you basically had the male deity often represented by the bull, right? The bull was strength. And next to it, the female deity represented by the Asherah tree or some other type of tree, which represented female fertility, and they were considered to be married to each other. And this type of idol worship usually took place on what was called the bama, often translated as a high place, but it meant a hill. So she is gone, and who's the she here? The she is Israel. Israel, has gone up on every high hill and under every spreading tree. Spreading tree, again, a reference to the female deity, the Asherah or other female deity represented by the fruit tree, right? Fertility. And has committed adultery there. In other words, Israel has committed adultery, quote unquote, this is an allegory, with these foreign gods by not worshiping Yahweh, by going and worshiping these foreign gods on these bamot, on these high places. Israel is betraying, is being unfaithful to her quote unquote husband, Yahweh, not meant in the literal sense, obviously meant as an analogy, and is committing adultery with these foreign idols, with these foreign deities. Okay, I thought that after she had done all this, she would return to me, but she did not. And her unfaithful sister Judah saw it. Okay, so very specifically, Israel. This is already after the split. We know that after King Solomon died, his son Rehoboam had a dispute with much of Israel, and Israel split into two kingdoms: the northern kingdom, also known as Israel, and the southern kingdom, known as Judea, which essentially consisted of the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. The northern kingdom consisted of the other 10 tribes, and that's where you get the idea of the 10 lost tribes, because when they were exiled by the Assyrians, in, if I remember my dates correctly, 706 BCE, although it was done in stages, but the final exile was 706 BCE. They were scattered. They were basically resettled. Many of them were resettled throughout the Assyrian Empire and hence lost their Israelite identity and became the lost tribes. At any rate, I thought after she had done all this, she would return to me, but she did not. And her unfaithful sister Judah saw it. I gave faithless Israel her certificate of divorce. Certificate of divorce is something that's mentioned in the Torah. When a man wants to divorce a woman, she gives her a sefer kritut, literally a scroll or a book of cutting off. Here they're translating it as a certificate of divorce, and sent her away because of all her adulteries. Right? So God, Yahweh, the quote-unquote husband, sees that his quote-unquote wife, again, this is allegory, is committing adultery with other gods, okay, figuratively speaking, sleeping with other husbands, okay, worshiping foreign gods, and so he divorces her. He gives her letter of divorce. Yet I saw that her unfaithful sister Judah had no fear. She also went out and committed adultery. Okay? Because Israel's immorality mattered so little to her, she defiled the land and committed adultery with stone and wood. Stone and wood is a clear reference to gods, to idols that are made out of stone and wood. It's also part of explicitly the curse that we'll see at the end of the book of Leviticus, where one of the curses is, if you do not return to me, then you will be spit out of the land. You will be exiled from the land, scattered to the four corners of the earth, where you will worship foreign gods of wood and stone, or stone and wood. Okay, wood and stone there, it doesn't matter. Okay, so that's the same idea. In spite of all this, her unfaithful sister Judah did not return to me with all her heart, but only in pretense, declares Yahweh. So we said that Israel, the northern kingdom, was exiled. The final exile by the Assyrians was in 706 BCE. Judah was not conquered by Nebuchadnezzar and his Saratzava, his head of the army, Nebuzaradan, spoken about in the end of the book of Jeremiah and also at the end of the book of 2 Kings. Details are given about this, but this was in 586 BCE. So essentially, Judah had over 100 years to see what happened to Israel, to see that Israel was exiled for all of her sins and repent. And still over these 100 years, Judah did not repent and eventually was exiled by the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, the Neo-Babylonians very specifically. So Yahweh said to me, faithless Israel is more righteous than unfaithful Judah. Go proclaim this message towards the north. Return, faithless Israel, declares Yahweh. So it's obviously speaking about before the exile, the final exile by the Assyrians of the northern kingdom. Return, faithless Israel, declares Yahweh. I will frown on you no longer. For I am faithful, declares Yahweh. I will not be angry forever. Only acknowledge your guilt. You rebelled against Yahweh, your God. You scattered your favors. Favors meaning your sexual favors is the implication there. To foreign gods under every spreading tree and have not obeyed me, declares Yahweh. Okay, and now we get to just about to the verse that we want to look at. Let's check in here and make sure everything's looking good. Holy fool. So, right, so verse 14, so we're in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 14. Return, faithless people, declares Yahweh, for I am your husband. Again, this is an analogy of Yahweh being the husband and Israel, or Judah being the faithless, wandering, adulterous wife. I will choose you, one from a town and two from a clan, and bring you to Zion. Zion is Jerusalem, of course. Then I will give you shepherds after my own heart, meaning leaders, who will lead you with knowledge and understanding. Okay? So this is a message specifically to Israel, the northern kingdom. Okay? In those days, we'll look at this in the Hebrew now. Now, this is a surprising passage. This is a surprising passage, right? In those days, meaning after you have repented and returned to Yahweh, speaking specifically to Israel, the northern kingdom. In those days, when your numbers have increased greatly in the land, declares Yahweh, people will no longer say, the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh. It will never enter their minds or be remembered. It will not be missed, nor will another one be made. How about that? What's the Ark of the Covenant? We know what the Ark of the Covenant is. When we studied the book of Exodus, we learned about it extensively, right? The Ark of the Covenant is the Ark of the Covenant, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark. You all saw that, right? Of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is the Ark that goes in the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the Mikdash, of the sanctuary, right? Let's get a picture of it. Come on. Behave yourself, Google. Why is Google not behaving itself? Again, there we go. At any rate, there you get the idea. Maybe that's a better picture. Okay. So let me open this picture. There you go. Okay, you get the idea. That's the Ark of the Covenant. Okay. The Ark itself is made of acacia wood and then covered in gold. The Ark cover with the two cherubim is made entirely of one piece of gold. It is the only thing. No, that's not true. There's one other thing in the furniture, quote unquote furniture of the temple that is also made of pure gold, and that's the menorah. But the the cover of the Ark of the Covenant is made out of beaten gold. It's beaten from one piece of gold. It's not put together from various pieces that are either it's not welded together or glued together or whatever else. It's made from one piece of gold. That's the Ark of the Covenant. And here in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 16, it says, in those days, meaning reference to later days when Israel is ingathered, when your numbers have increased greatly in the land, declares Yahweh, people will no longer say the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh. It will never enter their minds or be remembered. It will not be missed, nor will another one be made. This is a very surprising thing. The Ark of the Covenant in the tabernacle and the temple was the central piece of the furniture, right? It was in the inner sanctum. It was in the Holy of Holies. The only time that it was ever accessed was on the 10th day of the 7th month. We learned about this in Leviticus chapter 16, that the Kohen Gadol would dress up in special clothing and he would light incense and he would walk in to the inner sanctum just on the 10th day of the 7th month on Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippur, with the incense lit in order that the cloud of the cloud or the smoke coming up from the incense would cover the place where the glory of Yahweh, the Kavod Yahweh, which we've spoken about a lot of times, dwells. Where does the Kavod Yahweh dwell? Do you guys remember? Right between the cherubim on the cover of the ark. So this is essentially Yahweh's quote unquote home. That's where it's not a physical essence. I always like to put it in hippy dippy terms because I don't know how else to explain it. His energy emanates from that place on planet Earth. That's where his energy moked, his energy focal point on planet Earth. And that ark is eventually placed on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, as we know, right? And so this is a central part of at least the Tanakh's view or the Tanakh's understanding of how we build a house for Yahweh and how he quote unquote lives among his people Israel on planet Earth. And yet we have this prophecy that in the end of days, the ark will be forgotten, will not be missed, nor will another one be made. Fascinating and unexpected stuff, right? You wouldn't think the Tanakh would say that. What does it mean? I don't know. If we take it at face value, then we see what it means. That Ark of the Covenant, all of that, the trouble that Indiana Jones went through to find the Ark of the Covenant was for naught, because in the end of days, it's not going to be remembered. Okay, so that's a pretty surprising verse. Now, if you want to look up some interesting stuff on YouTube, there are all kinds of theories about where the Ark of the Covenant actually is. And you can find a bunch of them. Some say hidden, buried under the Temple Mount somewhere, that when the Babylonians were approaching, that the Israelites I think it was, which king was it? I can't remember. One of the kings hid it under the Temple Mount, buried it under the Temple Mount somewhere. That's one theory. There are other theories. One of the more interesting theories is the Ethiopian theory. Let's see if we can find this. There is a tribe, I guess, or a caste of priests in Ethiopia, in this city called Aksum. Okay, let's just read about this very briefly. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark of the Covenant is preserved in the ancient holy city of Aksum. For centuries, the great relic was kept in the Church of Mary of Zion, where the Emperor Iyasu is recorded as having seen it and spoken to it in 1691. So if you want to look up something interesting, I'm not going to go into it right now, but there's this priestly caste in the city of Aksum that claims that they have been guarding for millennia the Ark since the time of the exile of the Babylonian exile in 586, approximately 600 BCE, that they have been guarding the Ark of the Covenant. And there are certain quote unquote priests there that are trained from a very early age to guard this place where they claim that the Ark of the Covenant is kept. At any rate, you can look it up, interesting stuff. But we do have this prophecy here that in the end of days, that the Ark will not be rebuilt, remade. It will not even be remembered. Very surprising and kind of unexpected prophecy. Okay, let's go on to the third, talking about things that will not be remembered. And now we're in Jeremiah chapter 16. Any questions, any comments, by the way, so far? Anybody? Questions, comments? It produces electricity when moved. Really? Okay, well, that's the answer to our green energy problems, I guess. Okay. Let's go on to Jeremiah chapter 16. And again, just to get context, we'll read a bit in the English and then we can switch over. Oh, we didn't do the Hebrew in Jeremiah 3. We'll just leave it as it is in English. Okay. Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 1. Then the word of Yahweh came to me. You must not marry and have sons or daughters in this place. This is Yahweh speaking to Jeremiah. But this is what Yahweh says about the sons and daughters born in this land, and about the women who are their mothers and the men who are their fathers. Speaking, of course, about the land of Israel. They will die of deadly diseases. They will not be mourned or buried, but will be like dung lying on the floor. They will perish by sword and famine, and their dead bodies will become birds and the wild animals. But this is what Yahweh says: do not enter a house where there is a funeral meal. Do not go to mourn or show sympathy, because I have withdrawn my blessing, my love, and my pity from this people, declares Yahweh. Both high and low, meaning rich and poor, important, non-important, will die in this land. They will not be buried or mourned, and no one will cut themselves or shave their head for the dead. We learned about cutting yourself or shaving your head for the dead, specifically with regards to the Kohanim. Eventually, we'll learn about it for the rest of Israel. This was in Leviticus chapter 21, if I remember correctly. Okay, no one will offer food to comfort those who mourn for the dead. And right, we learned that you're not supposed to do this. Okay, so Jeremiah is in a sense mocking, or God is mocking the Israelites, that they mourn by doing these pagan mourning rituals, mourning, mourning, the dead rituals, right? That they're not supposed to do, that they're forbidden from doing. No one will offer food to comfort those who mourn for the dead, not even a father or a mother, nor will anyone give them a drink to console them. And do not enter a house where there is feasting and sit down to eat and drink. For this is what Yahweh Almighty, the God of Israel, says: before your eyes and in your days I will bring an end to the sounds of joy and gladness, and to the voice of bride and bridegroom in this place. This is a refrain we see a number of times in not just the book of Jeremiah, where prophecy is also given that the sounds of joy and gladness and the voice of the bride and bridegroom will return to where? To Jerusalem. And this is sung at every Orthodox Jewish wedding. Maybe you heard this song. Yishama behare Yehuda ubechutzot Yerushalayim kol sason vekol simcha kol chatan vekol kala. If you've ever been to an Orthodox Jewish wedding, you've definitely heard that sung. And that's quoting not this verse, but the refrain later on in the book of Jeremiah and other places, that the sounds of joy and gladness and the voice of bride and bridegroom will return to Jerusalem in the end of days, when Yahweh returns to Israel and when Israel returns to Yahweh. When you tell these people, verse 10, we're again in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 10, when you tell these people all this and they ask you, why has Yahweh decreed such a great disaster against us? What wrong have we done? What sin have we committed against Yahweh our God? Then say to them, it is because your ancestors forsook me, declares Yahweh, and followed other gods and served and worshipped them. They forsook me and did not keep my law. Verse 12, but you have behaved more wickedly than your ancestors. See how all of you are following the stubbornness of your evil hearts instead of obeying me. So I will throw you out of this land into a land neither you nor your ancestors have known, and there you will serve other gods day and night, for I will show you no favor. Okay. Verse 14. And now we have, so this is the punishment. You've been unloyal. You have not been loyal to Yahweh, so he's going to exile you from the land of Israel. But in the end of days, that's going to be reversed. And that's what we have here in verse 14. So let me switch over to the Hebrew here, starting in verse 14. So we're in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 14. A second, please. One second, sorry. Okay, so right, so we're switching over to the Hebrew. We're starting in verse 14. Headline here we see in the English is God will restore Israel. We're in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 14. And it says, Lachen, hine yamim ba'im ne'um Yahweh. There's our semicolon, the wishbone, the etnach. Therefore, behold, days are coming, declares Yahweh. Willo ye'amer od hai Yahweh, asher her'elah et bnei Israel me'eres Misraim. Days are coming where it will no longer be said, Willo ye'amer od hai Yahweh, as Yahweh lives. That's the language of an oath. That's an language of a solemn oath. As Yahweh lives, asher her'elah et bnei Israel me'eres Mitzrayim, as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel who brought them up out of the land of Egypt. Whole basis for our Passover holiday, which is coming up in about February, March, April, about 3 months. Hard to believe. Verse 15, Ki im ha Yahweh asher ha'ela et bnei Yisrael me'eretz tzafon u'mikol ha'aratzot asher hidiham shama. Stop there. But rather, it will be said, I'm filling in a couple of words there, but rather it will be said, as Yahweh lives, who has brought the children of Israel up out of the lands of the north and out of all of the lands, asher hidiham shama, which he had exiled them, pushed them away there. Or push them away there, exile them there. Wa ashiv wa ha shiv otim al admatam asher natati la'avotam, and that he has brought them back to their land, which I gave to their forefathers, to their ancestors. Right. So this is actually an incredible statement here. In the end of days, when Israel is brought back to the land of Israel, that's happening right now. I'm sitting in the land of Israel along with another, I think we're up to 7 million Jews. Okay. So in the end of days, when Israel is restored to its land, to the land of Israel, no longer will we say about God that he is the God who brought us up out of the land of Egypt. Instead, we will say that he is the God who has brought us up out of the lands of the north and all of the other lands which we were exiled to, and brought us back to our land which he swore, which he gave to our forefathers. It's an amazing statement when you think about it, because the basis of, of one holiday for sure, and mentioned many other times throughout the Torah and the Tanakh, is that we remember the main event that we remember, that Israel is to remember in its history, the defining event, essentially the event when Yahweh took Israel for his nation, as his nation. Yes, it was consummated a month and a half later at Mount Sinai, but the event where Yahweh proved that he had not forgotten Israel. We read it if you're in a rabbinical synagogue, we read it this parsha, that at least the beginning of it, the story of the Exodus from Egypt. This was the defining event that Yahweh did to prove to Israel, to show to Israel that he had not forgotten them. You would think he'd forgotten them. They were stuck as slaves down in Egypt for X amount of years. That's another discussion in and of itself. I think it's about 230 years, but I won't get into that right now. Okay. And you would think maybe he forgotten them, but he remembers them. We see this in this week's parsha, in the beginning of the book of Exodus. I won't go to it right now, right? But he remembers them. Pakod pakadati etchem. I've finally remembered to get you up out of this place. Or remember that you are stuck in this place as slaves. And I finally chosen this time to keep my promise that I made to your ancestors, to your forefathers, that you will be my people and I will be your God, and that I will send you down to Egypt, but I will eventually take you out from this nation that oppresses you. That's back in Genesis chapter 15, is when that promise is made to Abraham in the Brit Ben Apitarim, the covenant of the split animals. At any rate, so this is an incredible thing. The Exodus from Egypt is the defining moment. It's the defining event where essentially Yahweh shows to the people of Israel that he's not forgotten them, that he is fulfilling his promises that he made to the ancestors. You might have thought that he'd forgotten Israel, but he didn't forget Israel. And then through all these miracles, the 10 plagues, culminating with the slaying of the firstborn of the Egyptians, Yahweh is able to, and the Passover, right? That's where we get the holiday, the Passover sacrifice, and the holiday of Hakham Melech, that Yahweh shows and proves that his relationship to Israel is not only not forgotten, but it's cemented, right, through this event of taking us miraculously out of the land of Egypt by destroying what was essentially, I won't say the most powerful, but one of the most powerful empires in the world at that time. Okay, but it says here in verse 15 that we will no longer speak about Yahweh as the one who took us out of the land of Egypt, but rather we'll say Yahweh is the one who took us out of the lands of the north and all of the other lands that he exiled us to. So what's going to happen in the end of days, when we're brought back to the land of Israel, as I have been brought back to the land of Israel, and so many other Jews have been brought back to the land of Israel, is that these new miracles are going to be so amazing that they're going to completely overshadow the miracles of the 10 plagues, the miracles that are encapsulated, or that are what's the word I'm looking for? They're eternalized, excuse me, in the bringing of the Passover sacrifice and the holiday of Hakham Melech, the holiday of the festival of unleavened bread. And this is really an amazing thing. We're not even going to remember Yahweh anymore primarily for taking us out of Egypt, but rather for bringing us out of the exile back to the land of Egypt. And if we see, we're only partially through this, right? There's still only 1/3 of worldwide Jewry is in the land of Israel right now, approximately. There are approximately, if I remember my count correctly, about 18 million Jews worldwide, and there are now between 6 and 7, maybe 8 million Jews in the land of Israel. So the job is definitely not done, but we already see the incredible miracles that have happened with the state of Israel, or just the settlement in Israel, over the past, coming up on, believe it or not, it's hard to believe, but coming up on, in another couple of decades, it'll be 200 years since really the beginning of the return to the land of Israel in about the 1860s or so. Okay, another 30 years, it's going to be 200 years of the return of Jews in this modern Zionist, quote unquote, movement, or this modern return to the land of Israel. and we've seen so many of the miracles, the wars that Israel won in 67, 48 and 67, the Holocaust leading to the recognition by the United Nations, at least in theory, to a state of Israel, the partition plan of November 29th, 1947. That's when the partition plan was adopted by the United Nations, which basically took the former territories of the British Empire. The Brits had taken over the land of Israel from the Turks after World War I in 1917, and after World War II, the Brits were basically getting rid of all their colonies, all their territories, and they wanted to get rid of Israel as well, because it was at that point causing more problems than it was worth. There were already various Jewish undergrounds that were fighting against the Brits at varying degrees, and so the United Nations adopted what was called the partition plan, as I mentioned at the end of 1947, to split up the territory of Transjordan, which included all of modern Israel, or most of modern Israel, and all of modern Jordan, to split up between the Jews and the Arabs. And basically the Jews were just going to get a patchwork of territories where they already had population centers, and the Arabs were going to get the rest. So that in itself is already a miracle, that the United Nations already essentially was ready to recognize a fledgling state of Israel, and then the Arabs did not agree to that partition plan. And after independence was declared on May 14th, 1948 by Ben Gurion in his famous Declaration of Independence, look it up on YouTube, immediately the surrounding Arab armies attacked, hoping to wipe out this new state of Israel. And instead, Israel, with very, very, very inferior weaponry and a smaller army, basically won decisively, basically kicked the butts out of the Arabs. And instead of getting little patchwork of land, that's how the modern state of Israel was born, up to what is usually called the quote-unquote 1967 borders, because in 1967 we had the Six-Day War, where the borders were expanded further, including Israel's taking over of the Golan Heights, where I live today. That happened in 1967 in the Six-Day War. Okay, so that is an amazing thing. We already see that this is starting to happen, right? We already have a new holiday. It's not a biblically ordained holiday, but we have here in Israel, we celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, each approximately May. It's done by the Hebrew calendar rather than the English calendar, to celebrate this independence of the state of Israel in 1948. Yes, there's still a lot of work to be done here, but it is amazing all the miracles that have happened to bring now 7 million Jews approximately back to our ancient homeland, where we are speaking, I won't say our ancient language, but a variant of our ancient language. And I just saw an amazing lecture by a well-known Israeli named Avshalom Kor. He came to Katzrin, he came to the Golan Heights about, I think it was 3 weeks ago or so, and just gave an incredible lecture. He's a Dr. Avraham Kor. He's an expert on Hebrew. And he talked about the founder, essentially the founder of modern Hebrew, or the person who essentially was responsible for modern Hebrew being the language of the state of Israel, and that's Eliezer ben Yehuda. And he told some incredible stories about his history. And that itself is a miracle, that we're speaking here in the land of Israel. We're speaking, it's not biblical Hebrew perhaps, but it is a form of Hebrew. Okay, so enough said about that. And that ends our 3 verses that we wanted to speak about. Okay, once again, let's review. We have 2 Chronicles chapter 4, 2, where we speak about the Sea of Solomon, the big, giant, brazen, meaning bronze, bowl that Solomon built as part of his construction of the temple. And we saw that it was 10 cubits in diameter and 30 cubits in circumference. Again, implying that the ancient Israelites, again, I can't say were they aware of pi, because they could have just measured it, but again, showing that I guess pi worked back then. Okay, no big surprise there, but still, it is kind of amazing that we see this, an indication of the knowledge of pi, at least here in 2 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 2. So let's close that out. Number 2, we saw in Jeremiah chapter 3:16 that in those days when your numbers have increased greatly in the land, declares Yahweh, people no longer say the ark of the covenant of Yahweh. It will never enter their minds or be remembered. It will not be missed, nor will another one be made. This very surprising statement in Jeremiah chapter 3, that at the end of days, we will not find or remake the ark of the covenant, even though it was the focal point of the tabernacle / temple. And on the ark cover between the cherubim is where Yahweh's quote unquote lived. I say that in double quotes. So he doesn't have any physical form, but where the kavod Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh, dwelt between the cherubim on the cover of the ark. And yet here, Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 16 says, we're not going to even remember that ark, nor will we try to recreate it in the end of days. And then in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 15, we have the statement that we're not going to remember Yahweh as the God who took us out of Egypt, even though that is the defining event that cemented our relationship, or that represented Yahweh's connection with us, Yahweh's remembrance of the nation of Israel as a fulfillment of the promises to the ancestors, to our ancestors, Abraham, our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but rather that the miracles of the ingathering of the exiles at the end of days, which we see now with 7 million Jews living in the land of Israel, are going to be so amazing that they're going to overshadow this event of the Exodus of Egypt, and we will remember Yahweh for these new events, these new miracles, rather than this old miracle 3,200 years ago, approximately, of taking us out of the land of Egypt. And it just shows that Yahweh is not a static God. He's Elohim Chaim. He's the living God. He's constantly doing new things. Things that we think are static are not. Things that we think are forever are not necessarily forever. Yahweh is always, he's alive, just as we're alive. He's alive, even though he's outside of space and time, and we're in space and time. That's a whole philosophical story. Go watch, Cosmos by Carl Sagan. I happen to be watching an old episode of it today. Really, really good stuff. And but at any rate, it just shows that Yahweh is not a static, unchanging God. Maybe his essence is, but that's already sounds Kabbalistic, so let's not even go there. But he's constantly doing new things in this world. It's not just like a frozen in time kind of God. Okay. And that's the third verse. Okay. Any questions, any comments? We'll take a quick break and then we'll get into Leviticus chapter 23, which we started last week. We're going to go for not too much longer because it's already getting late here. And I have my flight tomorrow to New York. But we'll continue in Leviticus 23. We're up to verse 9, if I remember correctly. And this is going to be the Omer offering. Let's take a break for about 5 minutes. And I'll put on some music. And we'll come back and we will continue with Leviticus chapter 23.
צלצולי פעמונים בתוך ליבי מהדהדים עליהם הדרך בי פוגש ליבי אומר ומתרגש תן לי כאן למענך דמותך הולכת ומתרחקת כאן אני אל מול ביתך, דמותך הולכת ומתרחקת, כאן אני אל מול ביתך. עיניי חיי היו ימים של בוסר, עיניי צלמו דמעות של אושר, חיי היו ימים של בוסר. היינו יחד זוג תמימים, קצת שובבים מעט שונים, חיוך דומה בוער בי יש, מלטף קצת מתבייש, הולך אדם הזמן חולף, דודך הולכת ומתרחקת, כאן אני אל מול ביתך, דמותך הולכת ומתרחקת, כאן אני אל מול ביתך. שירו! עיניי צלמו דמעות של אושר, חיי היו ימים של בוסר, צלמו דמעות של אושר, חיי היו ימים של בוסר. היו ימים של בוסר. גיטרה אקוסטית, מנגן חשמלית, מנגן גם בוזוקית, תנו כפיים לאריק כהן. עוד ארוכה הדרך אל האושר, רצופה היא עת לחייך, לשמוח ולדמוע, אך מה יפים יפים הם, וזה הזמן לסלוח, לוותר לשכוח, גם אם זה קשה שנינו יחד את הכל נשנה, ולא צריך לברוח, את האמת למרוח, אני ואת לא נשנה את העולם הזה. את שתי עיניי נושא אני למעלה, לבקש תשובות לשאלה, אין מענה ואיש גם לא יודע האם בסוף הדרך זה הזמן לסלוח, לוותר לשכוח, גם אם זה קשה שנינו יחד את הכל נשנה, ולא צריך לברוח, את האמת לברוח, אני ואת לא נשנה את העולם הזה. לא צריך לברוח, את האמת למרוח, אני ואת לא נשנה את העולם הזה, אני ואת לא נשנה את העולם הזה.
Okay, all right, we are back after our little break. Let me just make sure you guys can all hear me. Let's just do a quick sound check. So please type in a Y in the comments if you can hear me and see me okay. So I know that everything is working from a technical point of view. Somebody, please, if you can hear me and see me, type in a Y in the comments. Anybody? I'm waiting for a Y. Why? I don't know. Can you guys hear me and see me? Somebody? Hello? All right. I don't know. I'm going to assume that you can because I see that everything looks like it's working from my end. It would be very helpful if somebody could type in a Y. Just check something here. Maybe you guys can hear me. Should be able to. Okay, good. Thank you. Howlin LLC. So before we go on, just a very quick pitch. I mentioned last week, and I have been trying to mention it more often, that we would appreciate your supporting the World Alliance of Qara'im financially. We have a lot of plans, which I've detailed in the messages that I've sent out to the group. We want to set up and establish a World Alliance of Qara'im community here in Israel, in the Golan Heights, in Katzrin. We want to start a yeshiva, even if that means at the beginning, renting a small little place, or maybe even doing it at someone's home to start off. We want to have a place where we can get together as a community and learn and worship and pray in a Karaite way. Hi, Jasmine. Okay, very nice. Thank you. and in a authentic Karaite way, which means lots of singing, lots of dancing, lots of musical instruments, including, if not especially on Shabbat, prayer from the heart, Torah study, all of these kinds of things. And we have many, many other plans as well. And in order to do this, we really need everybody to pitch in and be part of the community, help out with financial support. These things all cost time and money. And what I've been doing for the past, honestly, decades is supporting it with my own money and taking a lot of my own time, which I will continue to do. But as I mentioned, I do work an actual day job. Yes, I do. And I would like to, I really feel, not that I would like to, I really feel that now is the time where where it's right to start putting more effort, more hours per week into the World Alliance of Qara'im. And the only way I can do that and build all of these various projects is with the financial support of those who believe in our mission, those who want to be part of our community, whether it's the online community or the in-person community here in Israel. So please, if you have not already signed up, I think the easiest way is on Patreon. I'm going to post the links right now. Please do not donate on Shabbat, if it's Shabbat where you are, or on biblical holidays, but I am going to post the links. You could just save them, or you can find them in the original announcement. Okay. And it's in the chats there. But basically, the easiest way and the most consistent way is I set up a Patreon page. And Patreon allows you to give a monthly donation to the World Alliance of Qara'im. Now, the suggested amount that I set up is $36, which is very reasonable. It's basically the same amount that I give to my synagogue here in Katsrin, that I'm part of the community here. It's $36 a month. However, for whatever reason, if that's not appropriate for you, if you want to give more, you're certainly welcome and invited to give more. That would be amazing. But if 36 for whatever reason is not appropriate for you, you feel it's too much, then you can choose a lower tier, or you can even set your own amount. So if you want to just give, if you feel, listen, I have only $10 that I can give a month, I think everybody here can give at least $5 or $10 a month, then you can set your own amount. You can say, okay, I'm going to give $10 a month, or I'm going to give $5 a month, or I'm going to give $20 a month. Or if you're really in the mood, you could say, I'm going to give $1,000 a month. All of the money is going to be used towards building these projects. Okay, I don't have any overhead. This is all going to be used either for allowing me to cut back on hours working my quote-unquote day job and dedicate more time to the World Alliance of Qara'im, which will translate into more services from the World Alliance of Qara'im, more Torah studies, more resources dedicated towards building up the community, or it's going to be used for actual expenses associated with those kinds of things, whether it's renting a place or other things along those lines. So please, everybody who's in the study, there's not a reason why you can't. Every single one of you, I hope and believe, have benefited from these studies. I've done it for decades, completely, with getting, aside from a couple of donations here and there when people decide to give it, completely on my own money and my own time. And that served well for a long time. But now I really think that the interest in charism, because of various events that have happened, such as October 7th, such as all the turmoil in the West, the election of Trump, all kinds of things are going on. And I'm seeing really a significant uptick in people who are becoming more open to, taking the red pill and becoming very interested in charism. I'm getting a lot more responses in, I would say, the past half a year than I have ever gotten before. And so in order to take this community to the next level, it's not something I could do on my own. It's not something I could bear on my own shoulders. And so I'm asking and counting on each one of you to, if you feel that you believe in this movement, in this community, if you feel that you've benefited from this movement in this community, please help out financially so that we can make this community bigger and better and really grow it into something that is going to be essential for the future of the nation of Israel. Okay, so enough about that. Let's get back to studying. It's getting pretty late here. It's already 8:45 p.m. and I have my flight tomorrow, although my flight is at 11:30 p.m. and I couldn't find a direct flight to New York because of the war. A lot of airlines stopped flying in and out of Israel, and what that means is everybody, the only airline that really, I won't say the only, but one of the few airlines that kept on flying during the war was El Al, because it's the national carrier of Israel. So everybody went to buy tickets on El Al, which means there were no tickets on El Al available. And now some of the airlines have started once again to kind of trickle back in towards Israel. And the only, I won't say the only flight, but the best flight I was able to find is actually an indirect flight through Bucharest, Romania, on a Moldovan-owned airline, which actually seems like a pretty decent airline. So I'm flying tomorrow night from Israel to Bucharest, Romania. Then I have a layover of about 7 hours, and then I fly from Bucharest to New York, and I'll be in New York as of Monday. So once again, for those of you who didn't hear earlier, I'll be in the New York area, specifically in Queens, but I can get around New York for about a month or so. And if anybody would like to get together and is in the New York area, then please let me know. We could sit down and we could talk face to face, talk about Torah. We can talk about, I don't know, giraffes or whatever, talk about life. I would love to meet you guys in person for those of you that I have not met before. And some of you, of course, I've met before, such as Mariana Miknana, and of course, Tsuriel. But if anybody would like to get together in the New York area, just, private message me or in the group, in the World Alliance of Qara'im group or any of the other ways, and we will definitely try to work something out. Okay. That being said, let's now jump into Leviticus chapter 23. So we mentioned that Leviticus chapter 23, and let me open up my usual suspects. I do that during the break, so let me do it right now. So we've got our Robert altar. We'll just open them up for now, and if we need to open the other ones up afterwards, then we will. Torah, Robert altar. Let's give me a second here. And we're going to Leviticus 23. Leviticus 23. There we go. It's page 1015. 1015 here. And so we spoke about the Mu'adim, what's usually translated as appointed times or the scheduled times. These are scheduled times when Yahweh wishes to meet, and let me share the screen before I forget. These are scheduled times when Yahweh wishes to meet with his firstborn nation. In this week's Parsha, in the rabbinical synagogues, we spoke about how Yahweh calls Israel his firstborn. That's essentially the perfect way to describe the nation of Israel. All of the nations are Yahweh's children, but his firstborn, his favorite child, you could say, is Israel. That is his closest child. Just as Joseph, who was not chronologically the firstborn, he was actually the 11th born of Israel's 12 sons, of Jacob's 12 sons, but he was essentially Jacob's firstborn. He essentially took the position of firstborn. And the way we know that is that in the end of the book of Genesis, when Joseph meets Jacob on his deathbed or near his deathbed, then Jacob splits Joseph up into two tribes. He says that Ephraim and Manasseh, who are Joseph's sons, who were born to Joseph in Egypt, will whoops, what's going on here? 1 second. That's not the way you usually do it. That's the way we usually do it. That Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, will take the status of tribes. They will be called among their father's name like the rest of the brothers. In other words, the two grandsons basically are promoted to be as if they're sons. And how does that prove that Joseph is the firstborn, or is considered the firstborn by Jacob? Well, I've said it many times before. In ancient Near Eastern and ancient Near Eastern culture, and in the Torah explicitly, the firstborn son gets a double portion of the inheritance. So in other words, if you have, let's say, 3 siblings, there are 4 children altogether, then when the father who doles out his inheritance according to the Torah, he's not supposed to dole out 1/4 to each sibling. He's actually supposed to split the inheritance into 5 parts, and the firstborn gets a double portion. So the firstborn would get 2/5, and each of the other 3 siblings would get 1/5. So 2/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5 is 5/5 equals 1. So the firstborn gets a double portion, and that's exactly what we see in the case of Joseph. The fact that Jacob, at the end of the book of Genesis, elevates Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's 2 sons, to have the same status as the other 11 brothers, and in a certain sense, he demotes Levi to not get an inheritance, not get a land inheritance anyway. Then that shows that that Jacob considered Joseph to be like his firstborn, because he's gets 2 tribes come out of Joseph, come out of the loins of Joseph, rather than 1 tribe, as is the case for each of the other sons of Jacob, including the actual chronological firstborn, who was Reuven, who was thrown off his perch for having relations, sleeping with his father's concubine Bilhah. That's mentioned explicitly. Okay, so Israel is Yahweh's firstborn, and we have these appointed times, these times that are on the calendar. That's what an appointed times means. These scheduled times where Israel and Yahweh meet. That's what a moed is. We also saw that there's another phrase which occurs repeatedly besides moed, and that is Mikra Kodesh, which is often translated as a horrible translation, because nobody on planet Earth even knows what it means, which proves it's a horrible translation. And that's a Mikra Kodesh. This phrase we will see repeated throughout Leviticus chapter 23. Here it is, for example, regarding Passover, regarding Chag HaMatzot. And Mikra Kodesh is usually translated as a holy convocation, which is a completely meaningless phrase because nobody knows what the heck a convocation is. And adding the word holy to it doesn't add much either, because that's an overused word. But we used another phrase, which was an invitation to come together for a special day or for a set aside day. We mentioned that the word kodesh, which is usually translated as holy, actually comes from the underlying Hebrew root kuf daled shin, kadash, and really what it means is to set aside as special, dedicate, even though that's doesn't have a good translation in English. So the example I always give is Shabbat is a Yom Kodesh. It's a day of holiness. It's a Yom Kadosh, a holy day. And it's a special day. It's set aside. It's separate and set aside and different from the rest of the days of the week. The opposite of Kodesh is Chol, which just means average. Chol, usually translated, again, I've mentioned this a bunch of times, but just to review, usually is translated as profane, but that is also a horrible translation, because in modern English, the word profane is usually associated with the word profanity and has negative connotations. The implication of the word chol or lechalel it doesn't have negative connotations. It just connotes that it's not something special. It's just average. Just like Tuesday is an average day. You wake up, you brush your teeth, I hope. You have your coffee, I hope, because I love coffee. You go to work, you come home, you smack the kids around, and you have dinner, sit in front of the TV with your beer, and go to sleep. It's an average day, right? That's a Yom Chol, okay? And Shabbat is different. Shabbat is a set aside. It's a special day. It's a day that's dedicated to the Lord, a day that's dedicated to Yahweh. You don't work. You don't have the same routines. It's a special day. You have special meals. You get together with friends and family. You worship together. You pray together. You learn Tanakh together, right? That's the idea of a special day, and that's what we have here. These Mikra Kodesh So mikra comes from the same root as Karaite. Mikra, kra, Karaite. You hear it, right? So mikra means to call aloud or to read aloud. And the reason the Karaites are called the Karaites is because we read or we proclaim or we read aloud the Torah, which is called the mikra. Same word exactly, mikra'e. Okay, almost the same. And so mikra is another word for the scripture. Scripture, of course, comes from the Latin word. What's the infinitive? I guess it's got to be escriptere, probably, or something like that. Escriptare, which means to write. So scripture is the written word, right? You have in Spanish, for instance, escribir. Portuguese, it's also escribir. And so the Romance languages, right? Ascribe in English, right? So the scripture is that which is written down, but in Hebrew, at least in later Hebrew, in medieval Hebrew, it's called the scripture is called in Hebrew the mikra, not emphasizing the fact that it's written down, but rather emphasizing the fact that it's read aloud, as in the synagogue when each Shabbat in both Karaite and Rabbinite congregations, the scripture, the Torah, is read aloud. So that's the word mikra, and that's where we get the word b'nei mikra, which means the children of that which is read aloud, the quote unquote scripture, again, bad translation, or the Qara'im or the Karaites. So here it's the same, this word here, mikra, mikra'e, it's actually plural, and it's in something called the smichut form. I forgot how they call it in English, not the adjunct, I forgot the word, but basically you can look it up, the smichut form, it doesn't matter. So it means mikra'e kodesh, okay? It means the days of calling together people to the special or to a special or set aside day. And that's what we're talking about. That's what these moadim are. Moadim implies a special time set aside on the calendar, specifically the biblical calendar, because they're all laid out by month and day in the biblical calendar, with the exception of the Omer offering and Shavuot, which we'll talk about in just a bit. And on these days that are set aside in the calendar, there's a mikra kodesh, there's a calling together, there's a calling out for everybody to come and worship together or spend together this holy day, this set aside, this special day with Yahweh. Right? So we spoke about Passover, the Passover sacrifice last week, and we spoke about the holiday that is kicked off by the bringing of the Passover sacrifice. And now, and there's so much to say about that, including lots of relationship to the biblical calendar, which I've spoken about on the Biblical Calendar Society site. So, by the way, if you're not part of the Biblical Calendar Society, I invite you to join up. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom desde Cuba. Wow. Bienvenidos. Okay, Yidaber Yahweh. So we're now going to be speaking about the Omer offering, in English called the wave sheaf offering, and we'll discuss why it's called the wave sheaf offering. And we're starting in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 9. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 9. And it says, "V'yidaber Yahweh and Moshe lemor." So Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, or to say, verse 10. Verse 10. Here we go. Daber el bnei Israel ve'amarta alehem ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem uktzartem et kitzirah והבאתם את עומר ראשית קצירכם el hakohen. Okay, so verse 10, let's give it a translation. Speak to the children of Israel, amarta alehem, and say to them, ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem, when you come into the land which I am giving to you, uktzartem et kitzirah, and you harvest its harvest. Literally, katzar means to cut down or to make short. So you cut down its, what would be a good translation? How does Robert Alter deal with this one? You cut down its cuttings? No, that doesn't work. Robert Alter. Let's get a good translation from him. See if he has any nice ideas here. You reap its harvest. Any rate, you could see in Hebrew it's tzartam et ketzira. So tzar literally means to make short or to cut down. So when you cut down the grain, which is to be cut down, all right, we'll just say reap the harvest, okay? Ve'evetim et omer reshit ketirchem el hakohen, that you should bring an omer. We'll talk about what an omer means in just a second. It's a sheaf. Nobody knows what a sheaf is, so we're going to talk about what a sheaf is. So you should bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the Kohen. Okay? So what is a sheaf? Well, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and a video is worth 1,000,000 words. So we'll just go with the picture. It'll be enough. This is, no, not a chef. Some fat guy will come up if we type the chef in. A sheaf. Let's see if we can make these bigger. This is a sheaf, very specifically. Okay? In Hebrew, it's called an omer. An omer is also a measure of volume, of solid volume, but in this context, it means a sheaf. A sheaf is the way that grains, that that grass. How do you call that again in English? Grains from the grasses, or grass grains, meaning wheat, barley, rye, spelt, oats. Those are the 5 popular ones. This is the way that they were bundled together. Okay, you don't want to just take a whole bunch of individual stalks. They're hard to carry. What did you do? You took one of the stalks and you tied it around with either another, with one of the stalks of we'll talk about barley, with one of the stalks of barley, or with something else, and you tied them together in a bundle. So an omer, or a sheaf, is a bunch of grain stalks tied together into a bundle. That's specifically what an omer is. And so you're supposed to take an omer, what? Reshit ketirchem, from the first fruits of your harvest. Okay? Reshit, if anybody recognizes this word, Reshit, here we're translating as first fruits. The underlying root is Resh Aleph Shin, which means head, Rosh. Okay, so it means the head. Okay, the first, the head, the first of your harvest. We also see it in, what is the first word of the Bible in Hebrew? Bereshit. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim wa et haaretz. Usually translated, poorly translated, but usually translated as in the beginning. Really, it means when Yahweh first started creating et hashamayim et haaretz, the sky and the earth. When we get back to Genesis, I'll have a whole lot to say about that. But at any rate, it's the same word. If you look in Genesis 1:1, Bereshit, here we have Reshit. So this is the head, okay, or what's called often the first fruits of your harvest. El HaKohen, you bring it to the Kohen, to the priest. Why? Because the idea with all of these first fruits offerings, and we'll talk about a number of them, is that before you eat, you first give to God. And you give to God the first, and you give to God the best, because he's the one who gave everything to you. So as a way of showing gratitude, as a way of showing thanks, real days of Thanksgiving, right? The real Thanksgiving, although the American Thanksgiving holiday, well, it's also become very secularized and whatever, materialistic. But just like what it was meant to be, it was a day of giving thanks to Yahweh, right? By taking some of the harvest. It was a harvest festival. Cultures all over the world, going back to ancient times and straight up to modern times of harvest festivals. So this is, in a sense, a harvest festival, or a harvest offering. We take the first of the harvest, we take the best of the harvest, and really the first, but we're going to take the top grains from there. We tie it up in a bundle, bring it to the Kohen, and that's our way of saying thank you, Yahweh. But we do not eat from that produce until we've first given God his share, until we've first shown our gratitude and given our thanks to Yahweh. And that's the idea of a first fruits offering. Yahweh gets the first and he gets the best because he's given us everything. It's because of him, his reign, and his wisdom, and his plants and the earth that he gave us, that we're even able to raise any of this harvest. So we show our gratitude by giving him the first and the best of the harvest. And that's the idea of this Omer offering. It's a sheaf. Remember, sheaf means a bundle. We take a bunch of stalks from the first fruits of the harvest, from the first of the harvest, tie it up in a bundle, and bring it to the Kohen. Now, there's a question as to whether each family brings it or whether one offering is given for all of Israel. I think the answer is that one offering is given for all of Israel. We'll talk about why in a little while, but let's just assume that for now. Okay, let's go on. Oops. So we're in verse 11. Again, this is Leviticus chapter 23, verse 11. Wahinif et haomer lifnei Yahweh lirtzonchem mimacharat Shabbat yanifu kohen. Oh boy, this is. We'll get to that in a second. So wahinif et haomer lifnei Yahweh. So hanif is usually translated either as wave, or elevate. Sometimes it's called the wave sheaf offering in English. Sometimes it's called the elevation, or the elevation sheaf offering. So either hanif in modern Hebrew means to wave. Like when you talk about a wave of a flag, you say manif et degel. Okay, means wave a flag. What's the matter, sweetheart? What's the matter, baby? Okay. At any rate, so that's why it's called the wave sheaf offering. You take this sheaf and you either hold it up, you either elevate it like so, right? Raise it up into the sky, or you wave it up and down. That's the understanding, one or the other. Okay, so sometimes it's called an elevation offering, sometimes it's called a wave offering. At any rate, and we won't get into which one is correct now, it's not really relevant, they're both similar to each other, but it's usually called the wave sheaf offering, so we'll go with wave for now, okay? Lifnei Yahweh, whenever you see Lifnei Yahweh, that always means at the temple, or the tabernacle / temple, at the mikdash. 1 second, please. Okay. We saw this phrase a lot earlier in Leviticus. We saw this phrase Lifnei Yahweh, and Lifnei Yahweh always means basically in the temple or the tabernacle courtyard. Okay, Yahweh, it lives inside the tent in the Ohel Moed, in the tent of meeting. Remember, he lives in the inner sanctum in the Holy of Holies. We spoke about it before between the cherubim on the cover of the ark. That's where the glory, the Kavod Yahweh, quote unquote, lives, okay, or dwells. So you wave it before Yahweh, lirtzonchem. So this is, again, usually horrible translations here, but it means, in a sense, so that it will be accepted, or that it will be happily received, or something along those lines. Okay, Ratzon means willing or willingly received, maybe is a good translation. So you take this, or that you will be Ritzonchem. So it's literally le to Ritzon, the willing acceptance, chem of you or for you. So in other words, the idea is by taking this bundle of the first fruits of the barley harvest, and we didn't mention why it's barley, but we will in a second. And taking it to the Kohen, giving Yahweh the first and the best of the barley harvest by taking the sheaf, this bundle of barley stalks, tying it together into a bundle, and then waving it before Yahweh in the courtyard of the temple. Then it's our way of saying to Yahweh, we appreciate all you've done for us. We're thanking you. We're bringing you the first and the best. And Yahweh looks down at this and he says, okay, now I'm going to be good to these people. Okay. In other words, it's our way of gaining favor. It's your, meaning Israel's, way of gaining favor before me, quote unquote, Yahweh. Okay, that's the idea. When do we do this? Mimacharat Shabbat yanifu kohen. On the day after the Shabbat, the Kohen shall wave it. Okay, this is probably one of the central phrases, Mimacharat Shabbat, in all of the Tanakh with regards to Karaites and Karaism. And I'm not going to get into the whole thing here. I will point you to an article. But I will very briefly say, for those of you who are kind of new to Karaism or need a refresher course with this issue, just saying I'll walk in. Okay, I'll get back to that afterwards. Okay, so the rabbis understand this to mean the second day of Passover. So the rabbis, since the adoption of the calendar of Hillel II in, I believe it's 359 CE, if I remember my dates correctly, they switched over to the pre-calculated calendar often called the calendar of Hillel II, or just simply the Jewish or Hebrew calendar. So the rabbis understand this to be the second day of Chag HaMatzot, of quote unquote the holiday of quote unquote Passover. Remember, we mentioned that the word Passover only means the Passover sacrifice. The holiday is never called Chag HaMatzot. Actually, it's called once Chag HaMatzot in the Torah, but it's all the other times called, one's called Chag Pesach, but the implication there is just the holiday that follows the Passover offering. But aside from that one time, it's always called Chag HaMatzot, the festival of unleavened bread. And so the rabbis set that as the 15th of what they call Nisan, and it's a set fixed date. Has nothing to do with the actual observation. I won't say nothing, but has little to do with the actual observation of the new moon. And so they say that the word Shabbat in this case means that first day of Chag HaMatzot. In other words, the 15th day of the first month, the 15th day of Nisan. Why do they say that? They say that because just above we saw in, where is it? So in verse 7 here, it speaks about how the first day, Bayom Rishon, let me just read this verse. Bayom Rishon, the first day of Passover, quote unquote Passover, is a holy convocation, a calling together for the special day. Yelechem, it shall be for you. Kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu. You shall not do any worky type things on this day. Okay, we shall not do any worky type things. So it's like a Shabbat. You're not supposed to do work, even though it doesn't say melachat, it says melechet avodah. We spoke about the differences last week. I'm not going to rehash it right now. But the idea is, okay, we don't do work on this first day, as well as the seventh day. Here's the seventh day of Passover. And therefore, the Passover is like a Shabbat. And so therefore, when it speaks about here in verse 11, the day after the Shabbat is when you bring the Omer offering. The rabbis say that means the day after the first day of Passover, because the first day of the Passover is a Mikra Kodesh, a holy convocation, and you don't do Melechet Avodah, no worky type things to be done. And so therefore, the day after that is the second day of Passover, also known as the 16th day of Nisan, or the 16th day of the first month in the rabbinical calendar, and actually in the biblical calendar as well. But so that's the way they interpret it. So they believe that the Omer offering is always to be brought on the 16th of Nisan, the 16th of the first month. And they interpret this word Shabbat as meaning the first day of Passover, and therefore Mimacharat the Shabbat, the day after the Shabbat, meaning on the second day of Passover, again, the 16th of the first month. Okay, that's when Yanifu Kohen, Yanifenu Kohen, the Kohen shall wave it. Okay, shall wave it. Well, this doesn't hold water at all. And I've written an entire article. I'm not going to get into it right now because we're just going to go down a rabbit hole. It's a good rabbit hole, but nonetheless a rabbit hole, or as my former, I guess my friend who was kind of a Karaite, but also kind of a Messianic Jew used to say, but he was pretty intelligent and pretty funny. He always used to say, instead of the rabbit hole, he used to call it the rabbi hole. So we don't want to go down the rabbi hole here. We'll just leave that one alone. At any rate, we Karaites typically interpret this word Shabbat as the actual Shabbat, as a Saturday. I'll just briefly summarize. There are two words that are often used in the Tanakh which sound alike and which are similar in meaning. One is Shabbaton and the other is Shabbat. So while some of the holidays, some of these Mo'adim are referred to as Shabbaton, which means like a Shabbat-like day, it's Shabbati, they're never referred to as a Shabbat. Shabbat is a proper noun. It's a name of a day. It's a name of it's not really a mo'ed. It's the name of a special day, of a holy day, the seventh day of the week, Saturday, right? It's a proper noun, just like your name may be Tom or Jim or Donald or Baron or I don't know, whatever, right? So the name of the seventh day each week is Shabbat. That is its proper name. And that doesn't apply to any other day, except for one, which I'll talk about in a second, in the annual cycle. It doesn't apply. It's the first day of Chag HaMatzot, the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, could never be called a Shabbat. It might be called a Shabbaton because it's kind of like Shabbati in the sense that, yeah, we don't do worky type things. I'm using these phrases on purpose, but it's not a Shabbat. There are only 3 things in the entire Torah which are referred to as Shabbats. And this gives us a lot of very deep insight into the way biblical Hebrew works. So the 3 things that are called Shabbat are the Shabbat itself, the 7th day of the week. That's number 1. Anybody know what the other 2 are? Just throw them out if you want. Anybody? The second is Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim is Shabbat, and what's forbidden on Yom Kippurim, besides the commandment to afflict yourselves, to fast, is milacha is forbidden. So just like on Shabbat, milacha, meaning work, is forbidden, so on Yom Kippurim, milacha is forbidden. On the other Mikrei Kodesh, on the other holy convocations, milacha is never forbidden. What's forbidden is malechet avodah. It's a different phrase. It's similar, but it implies less of a strictness. Okay, so Yom Kippurim, the 10th day of the 7th month, is also referred to as a Shabbat. And the third thing that's referred to as Shabbat, we're going to get to in another 2 chapters in Leviticus chapter 25, the 7th agricultural year, which we call now the Shemitah year. It's not called the Shemitah year in the Torah. The year of, in every 7th year in the land of Israel, the land is to lie fallow. You're not supposed to plant, and you can only harvest that which grows on its own from previous years. That's called colloquially, or that's called later on, the Shemitah year, and that is referred to in Leviticus chapter 25, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks. That is also referred to as a Shabbat. Okay, so we have these 3 things: the 7th day of the week, quote unquote Saturday, Yom Kippurim, in other words, Yom Kippur, the 10th day of the 7th month, and the 7th agricultural year, when the land of Israel lies fallow, when it gets a rest. That is also called the Shabbat in Leviticus chapter 25. So, but this gives us really deep insight into the way biblical Hebrew works. And I've mentioned this many, many times before, that in biblical Hebrew, we often have words that have a basic core meaning, and then other words, or I'm sorry, I should say this differently, that same word can have extended meanings. So the example that I always like to give is the word yom. So the basic meaning of the word yom, which is translated as day, and this also works in English, which is why it's such a good example to use. The basic word of yom, meaning day in English, is the time when the sun is out. In other words, from sunrise to sunset. That's what day means. Like in English, if you're talking about daytime, it means when the sun is out. Okay, but the word yom can also mean a 24-hour period. So, like we see here. Oh, where is it? Oh, we'll get to it. On the 15th day of the blah, 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 where? Okay. On the 15th day of the month is when we start Chag HaMatzot. For example, there are many, many other examples of the way when yom or day is used this way. This obviously doesn't mean from sunrise to sunset. It means a 24-hour period, right? The 15th day of the month, the 16th day of the month, these are all 24-hour periods because the earth rotates on its axis once every 24 hours, approximately. Okay, so by extension, just like in English, it works the same way. By extension, the word yom doesn't mean just the time that the sun is out. It means a 24-hour period, just like in English, right? Tuesday, Thursday. Okay, I was in I don't know, Pennsylvania for a day. Oh, maybe that can mean just part of the day. But I stayed there, if you want to say something for a 24-hour period, I fasted for an entire day. Okay, that can mean a 24-hour period. So the word day, even in English, even though its core meaning means the time that the sun is out, by extension, it can mean a 24-hour period. And then we can extend it even further, both in Hebrew and in English. So sometimes the word yom can mean a period, like back in the day in English. Okay, so if you talk about, oh, those were the days. Okay, that use of the word yom, we see for like a period or for like an era, we see that use of the word in biblical Hebrew. And it also works in English because we could talk about, the days of yore. We could talk about, I don't know, the days gone by. We could talk about the day of the days of whatever. Okay, so that's a further extended use of the word day in English or the word yom in Hebrew. Okay, why is this important? This is important. Let's see, where were we for a second? It's on Shabbat. I forgot what I was saying. How did I start speaking about Yom? Because we're speaking about Shabbat, right? I was speaking about extended meanings for Shabbat. That's how we got onto it, and this is very important. Okay, so the basic meaning of the word Shabbat is Saturday, that seventh day. But just like for Yom, for day, the word day, we can have basic meanings, base meanings, and extended meanings. So for the word Shabbat, we have base meanings and we also have extended meanings. So the base meaning is this day of rest that occurs every seventh day. But we mentioned two other things, and there are only two other things in the Torah which are referred to as Shabbat. Yom Kippurim, the seventh day of the 10th day of the seventh month, is also referred to as a Shabbat. So why is the word Shabbat used? Because it's like a Shabbat in the sense that we don't do any work. Milakha is completely forbidden. It may occur on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Friday or whatever, but it's like a Shabbat because there's a complete cessation of work, just like there is on the Shabbat. Okay? And the other thing we mentioned is the seventh agricultural year, the quote-unquote Shemitah year, which we're going to get to in Leviticus chapter 25. Why is that also called the Shabbat? Because just like we rest every 7 days, we as the children of Israel rest every 7 days. So the land of Israel rests every 7 years. It's like a Shabbat in that sense. It's analogous to a Shabbat, that the land is resting every 7th year. It gets its Shabbat. It gets its year of rest. So it's by extension can be called the Shabbat. And those are the only three things in the Torah that are called Shabbat: the seventh day of the week, the Yom Kippurim, the 10th day of the seventh month, and the Shemitah year, or the year in which the land of Israel lies fallow. Those are the only three things that are ever called a Shabbat. So when the rabbis come along and say that the first day of Chag HaMatzot, the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, can also be called a Shabbat, they're wrong. It cannot be called a Shabbat. It can be called a Shabbaton, which means it's Shabbati or Shabbat-like, but it cannot be called a Shabbat because only three things in the entire Torah are called a Shabbat, the three things that we mentioned. Once again, the seventh day of the week, Yom Kippurim, and the seventh agricultural year when the land of Israel lies at rest, lies fallow. Okay? So I'm going to point you to an article that I wrote many years ago on Karaite Insights, but it still holds up as well today as it did back then. And I'll post the link, and you can go into all of the details about why. Well, it deals with both the Omer offering, deals really with Passover, the Omer offering, and Shavuot, and it's called On This Very Day. If you go to KaraiteInsights.com, it's on the front page there, but I'll post the link right here. Okay. And let me show it. Okay, so there it is. That's the link. You can copy it down. And it goes into great detail as to what day the Omer offering is to be brought, and hence what day Shavuot is to be celebrated. So I highly recommend reading the article. It's a very readable article. It's, if I may say so myself, very clear. Doesn't mean it's simple, but it's very clear what I'm trying to say there. Okay. At any rate, what does this mean? So we as Karaites generally understand this phrase "Mimacharat Shabbat" to mean the day after the Shabbat, meaning the day after the seventh day of the week, meaning, to make a long story short, Sunday. That the Omer offering is always brought on a Sunday. Well, which Sunday? Now here we have a little bit of a problem in that the Torah does not specify which Sunday the Omer offering is to be brought. And Karaites traditionally have understood this to be, although I think there's some evidence to say that this may not be the case, but we'll go with it for now because it is the majority Karaite understanding over the centuries. And that is that it's the day following the Shabbat that occurs within the 7 days of Chag HaMatzot, of the festival of unleavened bread. So the festival of unleavened bread we saw above lasts for exactly 7 days, which means that every day of the week is included in those 7 days once and only once, which means there will be exactly one and only one Shabbat that occurs within Passover, which occurs within the 7 days of the festival of unleavened bread, which is colloquially called Passover. And that is the Shabbat that traditionally the Karaites understand is being spoken about here in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 11. And therefore, the day after that Shabbat, or the Macharat Shabbat, the day after, is the Sunday that follows the one Shabbat that occurs within the 7 days of Chag HaMatzot. Okay, so let's give an example. Let's say Chag HaMatzot starts on a Tuesday, then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, then Saturday comes. Then that next day, Sunday, is the day that the Omer offering, the wave sheaf offering, is going to be brought. Let's say I have an extreme case. Let's say Chag HaMatzot starts on a Friday night. It starts when the Shabbat starts. Okay, well, what does that mean? That means that the first day of Chag HaMatzot is the Shabbat. And that means in that case that the second day of Chag HaMatzot is going to be that second day of the second day of Chag HaMatzot is going to be Sunday, actually Saturday night to Sunday night. And on that Sunday day is when the Omer offering is going to be brought. Let's say, however, that Chag HaMatzot starts on a Saturday night. When the Shabbat goes out, that's when Chag HaMatzot starts, based on the observation of the new moon, right? That's how we, as Karaites, set the days of the Moadim, of the holidays. What does that mean? That means the first day of Chag HaMatzot is going to be a Saturday night to a Sunday night, and it's only going to be that last day. It's going to have to wrap, the entire week is going to have to wrap around, and the seventh day of Chag HaMatzot will be a Friday night to a Saturday night. In other words, the seventh day, or the last day of Chag HaMatzot, will be a Shabbat, and that will be the Shabbat within Chag HaMatzot, and the following day, which is actually outside, it's after Chag HaMatzot already ends, will be that Sunday, the 8th day after the beginning. It's no longer Chag HaMatzot because Chag HaMatzot lasts only 7 days, but that 8th day after the beginning of Chag HaMatzot, already after Chag HaMatzot is ending, that Sunday is when the Omer offering will be brought. And if that's a bit confusing, I apologize, but it's all explained very clearly in the article, okay? To make a long story short, we Karaites understand the traditional understanding, well, the Torah understanding, that it's clear from the Torah that the Shabbat is the 7th day of the week, aka Saturday. Which Saturday it is a bit ambiguous in the Torah, and the Karaites traditionally say it's the Saturday, the Shabbat that falls within the 7 days of Chag HaMatzot, because there will be one and only one Shabbat that falls within the 7 days of Chag HaMatzot. Okay, because Chag HaMatzot will end a week later at the same time that it began, give or take an hour. Okay. Okay. I think maybe we should stop here. It's late. We're going to stop here. Okay. Well, we only did a couple of verses, but I think we had a pretty good study. Yeah, we're going to stop right here. Wait, maybe we could just go through really quick. Okay. No, there's a lot to speak about here. No, I'm going to stop here because I want to do it justice. So let me mark down for myself that we're starting next week in verse 12. So next week I'll already be in New York. I'll already be in the United States of America. And so the time may be a little bit different there. I'm not sure. I may do it afternoon time in New York, which means nighttime in Israel, or I might still be jet lagged, and so I won't do it. I don't know. We'll see. I'm gonna have to see how I feel, and of course I'll send out an announcement starting with verse 12. Okay, but we're gonna end it here. I highly recommend reading the article that I linked here. Okay, I'm gonna take it off the screen now. Go back here, hide banners. There we go. Okay. Before we sum up, any questions, any comments before we end today's study? So I think it was a good study. We spoke about unexpected things in the Tanakh. Just to summarize, we spoke about 3 things: the kibiachol, the seeming appearance of pi in 2nd Chronicles chapter, forgot chapter and verse. I'll have to go look at the study. Was it chapter 4, verse 2? I can't remember, or maybe it was 2, verse 4. I think it was chapter 2, verse 4. Number 2, the unexpected declaration in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 16, that the Ark of the Covenant will be forgotten, will never be rebuilt, will not even be remembered in the end of days. And the statement in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 14 and 15, that Yahweh will no longer be remembered for taking us out of the land of Egypt for the Exodus. We have an entire book, at least in English, named Exodus. Yahweh will no longer be remembered for that primarily, but rather for ingathering the people of Israel from the four corners of the earth, proving that Yahweh is an Elohim Chaim, he's a living God. He's not static. He's constantly doing new things for us and in this world. 3 unexpected verses. And then we spoke about here in Leviticus chapter 23, we spoke a bit about this first fruits offering, this wave sheaf offering known as the Tnufat Omer, the waving of the sheaf. We spoke about what a sheaf is, a bundle of barley plants. We didn't yet mention or speak about why it's barley. To make a long story short, the way we know it's barley is because that's the first harvest in the land of Israel. If you live in the land of Israel, you'll see each year that it's the barley that comes up first, followed by about a month and a half later by the wheat. That's related with Shavuot. And then finally, there's the summer and fall fruits, and that's connected, or that's that the holiday Sukkot relates to that. And we'll get to all of these as we continue to study Leviticus chapter 23. So any final questions, any final comments before we end it? About anything? Open house here, free question period. Does anybody have any questions at all about anything? Okay, well, if not, then I will thank you all for joining me for the study. This has been Hakham Melech Ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im. And please let people know about the study. Share, subscribe, like, all of those, social media kind of thingies. Let your friends know about it. We'd love to have as many people as are interested come and join the study. And the only way they can do that is if they know about it. So spread the word. And I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom wherever you are in the world, or a Shavua Tov. And Bizrat Yahweh, with the help of Yahweh, we will see you all again next week. Once again, this is Hakham Melech Ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, signing off, wishing you a Shavua Tov, a Shabbat Shalom, and a Shavua Tov. We'll go out with music, as we always do. So let me set that up.
ורוח של ערבית על הגבעות נשבה, ובמשעול ההר פסעו על האלה מלחשים, היו הם שיר של אהבה. ציפור לילית שורקה לשמי הליל, ושיח דוקרני הוצת בלהבה, על אבן של דרכים ישבו על מה ואלם, מלחשים היו הם שיר של אהבה. פנס השביל קבע דומם ברוח, אדם כי ליומו איגרת נכתבה, במעלה השביל פסעו על מעלה, מלחשים היו הם שיר של אהבה. הקיץ היום אל שברונו של ליל, תם יום של שרב, הגיע יום סוער, ועל פסגת ההר לחשה עלמה לאלה, שיר אהבה אשר לעד לא ייגמר.
ערב של שושנים נצאנה אל הבוסתן, מור בסמים ולבונה לרגלך מפתן. ערב של שושנים נצאנה אל הבוסתן, מור בסמים ולבונה לרגלך מפתן. לילה יורד לאט ברוח שושן נושבה, בהלכה שלך שיר בלט זמר של אהבה. לילה יורד לאט ברוח שושן נושבה, בהלכה שלך שיר בלט זמר של אהבה. שחר הומה יונה ראשך מעלת אל עלים, פיך אל הבוקר שושנה מכתפנו לי. שחר הומה יונה ראשך מעלת אל עלים, פיך אל הבוקר שושנה מכתפנו לי. לילה יורד לאט ברוח שושן נושבה, בהלכה שלך שיר בלט זמר של אהבה. לילה יורד לאט ברוח שושן נושבה, בהלכה השפה שלך שיר בלד, זמר של אהבה, זמר של אהבה.